You want to work smarter, not harder. You want to figure out what are the right things to build, not just like how do we build faster and deploy more, right?
On today's segment, Anna shares her thoughts on the increasing demand for self-care in a world that glorifies hustle culture. She also chats about the future of work through the Metaverse and the companies that M13 is currently investing in. What's your thoughts or perspective on the shift between maybe 4 or 5 years ago? It felt like, it was the hustle culture where you have to hustle, you no sleep, no nothing, go, go, go. And it feels like over the last 3 to 4 years, there's been more of this shift. The concept of the 4-day work week comes, and the concept of giving benefits to help employees around childcare or mental health. And what's been your perspective of the shift in, how entrepreneurs and startups run, in that sort of environment?
I think it's really hard to talk about that without talking about mental health and kind of how we were all affected by the pandemic. I don't think anyone sitting here today thinks it is possible to have that go, go, go kind of hustle atmosphere and keep your mental health. And I think everyone is recognizing, that we need to kind of practice self-care and take care of ourselves, and our people and the people around us, in order to be successful. If we don't do that, there's no point to any of it.
Yeah.
I think the fact that we're talking about mental health is a great thing. It's unfortunate that we had to have such a mental health crisis in order to get to the point of talking about it and paying attention to it. But I think if it has a positive benefit on kind of startup culture and on having people trying to build in a more sane way, then it'll turn out to be a good thing.
I intuitively understand what you were saying, and I can see how it plays out, but it feels in some ways counter to being the investor, or, where you're shouldn't, I guess the traditional thought process would be everyone should be hustling. Everyone should be working harder. It's that's how you get big, big, big. But have you learned over time that it actually is not correlated, and teams that are more balanced are performing better? Does that make sense, the question?
Yeah, it does. I mean, so I think the model of the hustle culture is sort of as if you're at the beginning of a race and there's 4 cars and you have to drive faster in order to win. The reality is there's very few startups that are in that 4-car race. Everyone is running their own race. And so how do you run your own race well? You want to work smarter, not harder. You want to figure out what are the right things to build, not just how do we build faster and deploy more, right? So yes, you want to have velocity, but you want to do it smartly. And so it's not about just time on task and putting hours in. It's about how do you, make better decisions by deeply listening to your customers, by talking to your team, by letting people get a good night's sleep so they can think clearly the next day and make a better decision.
Yeah.
That's always going to win over imagining that you're in some kind of, race against an invisible, opponent.
Yeah. Now, I mentioned this earlier, but my recollection of our conversation in looking at our interview around cryptocurrency and Web3, it wasn't that you were against it or anything. You're just it didn't feel at that time like it was important or exciting. And I know I'm putting words into your mouth, so that may not be how you felt. But what are your thoughts now? Maybe not necessarily on just cryptocurrency and the coins, but the infrastructure people are building and this just general move to Web3. You're seeing almost daily, A16Z launches this fund and Upfront's focused here. And how is Web3 and crypto and the Metaverse, how are those things playing into your guys' overall thoughts? And maybe not even you guys, what about just you yourself and what you've been thinking about it?
Yeah, so I actually did in 2019 have 2 crypto companies in my Techstars class. Lunar Crush, which is doing really, really well, which is social analytics for crypto trading. And it's the top social analytics platform today for people that want to trade crypto. I didn't understand what it was at the time in 2019. I just loved the team. It was one of those, I don't get what you're building, but I think you're amazing. And so that's, been a really fun one to be involved with. And the other one was a company called Fabrica, which was actually putting plots of land on the blockchain, turning properties into NFTs.
Real plots of land?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
None of those fake plots of land. If you're
No, this is not metaverse real estate. This is actual physical real estate. So if you go onto OpenSea and you search for Fabrica.land, you can actually buy property on OpenSea.
Wow.
So they're NFTs that are representing underlying properties. So, and I think that is an idea that now has matured. Now that idea, is kind of developing. So it's going to be interesting to see Fabrica playing in that space. And there's a lot of other companies looking at that. So Web3, kind of broadly speaking, when we talk about Web3, we think about it as the underlying technologies that enable new business models. And it's a space we're actively investing. Our current Fund 3 portfolio is probably about a third, crypto related. But it's strongly overlaid with what are our core investing theses? So we're investing in the future of consumer behavior. Health, how are we going to access healthcare, fintech, future of work, and then e-com infrastructure. So if you look at some of the bets we've made in Web3, they all kind of support those areas. So for example, we invested in Milo Credit, which is underwriting mortgages based on crypto assets. So a really exciting company in the prop tech space. We invested in StepIn, which is getting a lot of play lately.
Joel's been telling me about StepIn for weeks now, and I'm like, I think I might have to buy some shoes today.
We invested in Flipside Crypto, which is a developer analytics platform, and let's see what else. Kudos, which is building a kind of a Web3 based Pinterest, social platform. So we're and then we have M13 had actually been investing in for a while in the space. Lightning Labs was one of our first investments. So building the Lightning network on top of Bitcoin. So and we have a number of other companies kind of in the pipeline. So we are I would say pretty deep into it. And as an investor, we are focused on combining our kind of knowledge of consumer and how to launch new consumer products with our growing kind of expertise around Web3.
I was having a meeting in New York with another guest on the podcast, and he's still, when I asked him, what are your thoughts on crypto and just kind of the space in general, he still had a fairly a negative perspective. He's like, well, what's the utility? I show me the utility. And so my question to you, he was still at the point where he's like, show me the utility and I'll become more of a believer. When you sit there, because you focus on where's the world going to be 10 years? When you sit there, are you thinking to yourself, I know it's going, or I think it's going to get there? Or do you also have that some skepticism living deep within around what are we actually going to use all of these tokens
for? So I'm a
for?
believer now, right? And here's why. So if you think about when mobile first emerged, we had people who were saying, oh, I'm investing in mobile now. You would never think about that today. No one invests in something just because it happens to be an app, right? That's not an investing strategy. Mobile is simply a delivery method to communicate with customers,
yes.
Right? So it's the same thing with Web3. It's really it's a delivery method to support transactions and to manage data. So some of the things it allows you to do are customers to own their own data, for you to authenticate who you are without revealing who you are. That's really exciting. Think about what we can do with that.
Yeah.
Enabling microtransactions, allowing people to get micro rewards inside communities for doing tasks. So when we think about this idea of building community and around work, right? Web3 is really interesting applications for that. So I think about it in terms of, what does it look like when the end customer doesn't even have to know they're interacting with something that's Web3?
Totally.
Right? So take StepIn as an example. You just download the app. Sure. Okay. So you have to buy Solana in order to engage with that community. But other than that, you're just having an experience interacting with a really fun gamified app that's helping you work out.
Totally.
So it's not really about the underlying. It's the underlying technology is the means to an end. And we have to stay focused on what are the products and services for consumers that we're building, right? And then if Web3 enables them, great.
Thank you for listening to this segment of Demo Day. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or demoday.coefficientlabs.com. And don't forget to join us on our next episode with Brett Brewer, co-founder of Crosscut Ventures. I'm Sean Goldben. Peace, guys.